everyone. Interesting times we're in. Wasn't nervous about doing this GCAP talk, but I am nervous about all the tech involved on this side of it. So fingers crossed we all work out perfectly. Welcome. Super excited to be doing this GCAP talk today. It's called Upskilling Voice Actors for Australian Video Games, which is a topic that for today's times I think is incredibly important, and it's really exciting as well. A little bit about me. My name is Amy Smith. I'm a full-time voice actor. I've been doing this on and off for about 10 years, very on and off, and have been doing this for full-time for 3 years, which I'm super fortunate to say is my full-time gig. I've done lots of different types of voiceover and voice acting. I do and have done commercials, e-learning, explainers, IVR, a little bit of radio imaging, animations and video games, but the majority of my work, a good 80%, my bread and butter, is actually animation and video games, which is super exciting. I've voiced in video games like Smite, Mobile Legends, Freedom Planet, the Warhammer 40k title, Adeptus Titanicus Dominus, and tons of others. So it's an area I'm incredibly passionate about, and for years have been helping Australian voice actors get involved in it as well. So I hope that this is kind of a really cool summary of how to get a little more involved in it. So the agenda today, we're going to start off with talking why this talk. Why have I decided to choose this topic? Because I think that the background is really important in order to kind of launch full-blown into this. The next part is staying healthy. Important notes for acting in video games, equipment, how do I build my portfolio in video games, rates, which is always a huge question, which should be helping game developers and voice actors alike to make sure that we're on the same page, additional resources, because of course this is only a 40-minute talk and then basically a 10-minute question and answer at the end, so I'm kind of just latching onto lots of different types of things, and then I'm kind of giving you a little more of an overview at the end if you are looking at receiving a little bit more information about this. And of course, our question and answer. So, why this talk? I was actually super fortunate to do a talk at GCAP in person back in 2019, and I called it Finding the Right Voice Actors for Your Game. I did it for two reasons. One of which was I obviously wanted to provide information about where to find voice actors and how to make sure that you're hiring the right people and what to expect and all those kinds of things. I wanted it to come from an informative point of view. But the other thing is I was super curious about receiving some information back. There was a lot that I wanted to learn from game developers. And I came up with two wonderful discoveries, which I'm really pleased to say has actually informed this talk. One of them, and it doesn't matter who said it, and a lot of people tend to feel the exact same way, which is why I thought it was a really amazing point to bring up. Somebody in the audience, when I had said, why don't we hire Australian voice actors for our Australian games? And I had said, I have tons of Australian clients, and a lot of the time I am putting on an American accent to fit their game structure. And I was always curious as to why we're kind of not putting out an Australian-centric theme in our games and in our accents and things like that. And I got a ton of responses, and I predicted a ton of them too. Things like, one, voice acting is really expensive, but if it wasn't so expensive, it's a would love to have in a lot of game developers' minds. So I predicted that. Obviously, if you have, instead of just gibberish, if you had actual voices, localization costs are incredibly expensive too, so you're not just paying for it in English, but in Spanish and Japanese, depending on the scope of the game. And a couple of other things, like one of which is, well, our game isn't Australian themed, so kind of why would we have Australian voice acting? So I predicted all of these things. One of the things that I hadn't quite thought of was somebody had said Aussie accents sound odd in games. And it's true. And I think we've all kind of thought it. And it obviously comes from this place of, well, we don't hear it a lot. Like we hear it obviously in our day-to-day, but we don't hear it in media. And we haven't for years, to be quite frank. A lot of our Australian accented roles go to Americans too. So it's just a little bit strange. But over these last 2 years, we've actually had this huge representation wave. And we're going to go into this a little bit more later as well. But it's been really amazing to see with movements like Black Lives Matter and a real push for authenticity in all forms of media. It's actually something that's becoming quite coveted. It's something that we want to see in media. We don't just want one particular perspective in games. We want to see lots of different realities. We want to hear different things. We want it to feel fresh. And I know that we have this thing where I feel it as a voice actor where I would try to blend in with having an American accent in my tool belt to blend in so that I have the chance of standing out if I'm good enough. But it's becoming really amazing that now what actually makes us different is actually becoming something that's more wanted. So I think that this has been a huge thing in these last 2 years. So I found it really awesome that I got to do this talk in 2019, and there's been huge developments since then. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what else has happened. But the other thing is, not going to go too far into this. I know that it's going to be embraced in a ton of different talks, but we had the tax rebate announcement this year, and mid next year we're actually going to have the implementation, which is really cool. So with the conversations of us saying things like it's been a would very much like to have in our games, now I feel like it's kind of that next thing that's going to be really possible. I genuinely feel like from now, we're going to have a ton more Australian games with Australian voice actors, and as a result, we kind of need to be ready on both sides. It's really exciting. So the other side of that, flicking through. So these last 2 years have been the most I've personally ever worked with my native Aussie sound, which is really incredible. So in terms of international games, I've worked on Chinatown Detective Agency, Best Friend Forever, Levelhead, Bum Simulator. And then I feel like with hearing this more in international games, as a result, it's kind of encouraging Australian devs to not shy away from it either, which is really exciting. We're embracing what makes us different. And then same sort of thing in these last 2 years. I've worked on games like Broken Roads, Henry Moss and the Wormhole Conspiracy, Eastern Market Murder, and Warp Frontier. And it's actually being something that's celebrated, and it's becoming something that it is talked about in marketing because it's still quite unique to have an Australian voice cast or have Australian themes running throughout our games, and it's a really exciting time. So I feel like the international games are kind of encouraging us to embrace this element about us quite a lot more, which is really cool. So I realized I should have had this slide probably beforehand, but that's fine because we're emulating the live experience. All right, so with having the GCAP talk in 2019, it was this ding moment because somebody had actually said, I don't know where to find enough experienced Aussie voice talent at video games that can fill my games universe. And that was just this weird and I kind of thought to myself, I can't either. And I was like, I'm a voice actor and I couldn't think if you needed 20 voice actors to voice in your Australian video game, I probably couldn't help you. But in terms of them being experienced at video games, them being Australian, just meeting all those specs, probably couldn't do it. It wouldn't be this confident referral that I could do. And obviously that's what I want to do. I would want to refer people who I know can smash it out of the park. So that was this huge moment of, oh my goodness, we're not prepared for this. Even if we were to have this representational wave, even if we were to have these Australian-centric games, who would voice in it? So I kind of thought to myself from there, these last 2 years have been quite busy. I thought to myself, I'm in quite a fortunate position. I do have quite a lot of Australian clients. I have been doing this for a long time. It's time that I kind of share this on and ensure that it helps everyone if there is a really strong, ready-made group of people, lots of people who can contribute towards this medium. So what I ended up starting to do was I was running some video game voice acting workshops, but I expanded my panels at conventions and my workshop list as well to provide more information and reach more people. Something else that I did was making a private referral spreadsheet. So I have a list of Australian voice actors and where they're based and what they're strong at, and it's something that I'll actually present to clients. And just so I know, I don't have to rely off the top of my head. I have that list there if anybody ever asks me. Going the extra mile for current clients. If I can see they're auditioning for a few Australian roles, I will go out of my way. They might not be asking me, but I'll just ask, look, would you like a list of people who will be authentically meeting the specs for the submissions. Because, I mean, if you're working with international clients, they tend to work with people who are a little bit closer to them, or they ask friends that aren't necessarily reaching a different subset of voice talent. So I kind of thought if I start kind of getting ahead of that and showing a little more initiative and referring more people, it means that Australian voice actors' portfolios are being expanded and we can actually actively contribute towards our media here, which has been working really well. Another thing, I moderate an Aussie Discord group as well. So I post casting calls, provide consult when I can, network with other voice actors so I can kind of keep my finger on the pulse as to what they're doing and whether I can add them to my list, and posting local workshops, etc. Just things to kind of improve the information going out there and expanding opportunities as well. Because I just kind of see it as we have to be ready. I think with this tax rebate, voice acting is going to be this thing that is going to be really wanted in games. All right, so times be changing. As a bit of a summary. 1, we need to ensure we have a range of professional voice actors within Australia who understand how to approach video game voice acting. Because one of the things about the Australian market, and with signing with agents and things like that, the majority of Australian working voice actors are in commercial and corporate. And I'm going to go through it a little bit later as to how those skills don't necessarily translate over into a completely different sector. 2, have portfolios that inspire confidence in clients. Clients want to know that, okay, cool, my game is a MOBA, this person has MOBA experience as well, they get it. Number 3, have great home studios based on these remote times. I'm only going to touch a little bit on this because I kind of see voice acting as 3 pillars. One of which is obviously performance. The second of which is marketing, which I think I'm relatively okay at. And number 3 is technology. Technology is always my shortest pillar. It's always going to be that case, and I'm sorry in advance. So I'm going to kind of lightly glance on that because it's obviously important. It's just I don't know if I'm the right person to lurch into it. Number 4, the big one. Understand how to charge for video games. With other voice actors, that's probably the biggest question I constantly get. And from clients as well, obviously, like how much do you charge? We kind of want to break that down as to why it costs what it costs. And of course, number 5, we need to ensure that connections can actually happen. So where can Australian developers find voice actors, and of course, vice versa. Cool. Glancing through this, important notes for acting in video games. So commercial voice acting versus video game voice acting. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of Australian voiceover talent that are excellent at commercials and corporate work and everything. And it's all very, very intimate. It's a very, very different style to video game voice acting. Some of it's intimate, but it can also be incredibly highly stylized. So I think the best comparison to draw with this is I used to be a primary school teacher. So it means I have a degree in teaching, but just because I have that degree, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be an excellent high school teacher, right? Definitely a lot of those skills cross over, but my general temperament and my behavior management just might not be suited to a high school environment. Not to say I couldn't learn to do that because I've still got wonderful foundations, but there are still definitely skills that I would need to pick up to be adjusted for that environment. So it's very similar with this as well. The next part, understanding how the acting style can drastically change based on the genre and language and the specs. So with video games, we'll see language in, for example, MOBAs and some JRPGs and things like that, which are things like big and bold, highly stylized. That's when we kind of need to go a little bit bigger than we think we need to go. With MOBAs in particular, or in some case first-person shooters, we need a ton of projection because we need to be visualizing that in a lot of cases you're in the middle of a battlefield. It needs to go above those sound effects that are going to be presented in the game, even if you're just in a live directed session and you can't hear those sounds. So making sure that you have that understanding and that knowledge of how video games actually present themselves based on the genre in which you're working with. And then on the other end of the spectrum, which probably suits commercial voice acting a little more in some cases, in which it's more conversational, if you see terms like that, or nuanced, or cinematic. So video game voice acting is on quite a scale. The use of gesturing, once again, can be presented in other forms of voiceover as well, but I find that with commercial voice acting, at least when I do it, I will kind of gesture to indicate to myself when I want inflection to go up, when I want to take a beat, when I want to emphasize a particular word. That's kind of how I'll use gesturing, kind of linear like this. But when I do video games, it's quite different. I was doing this really broad Australian role where I was literally punching the whole time just to change my cadence up entirely. For another role, so for a peppy AI type character, my hands constantly went like this. So I would always refer to it as like my internal metronome that I'm putting out to reach outside of myself and my natural cadence to accurately represent another character. So gesturing is super important. Obviously for voicing grunts and expressions like that as well, gesturing is really important as well. And then the last one, use of ad-libbing of expressions to literally breathe life into characters. For commercial voice acting, they actually like to chop out all of the breaths, which is a little bit funny. Whereas with video games, breathing informs and should be representative of the character. If you want to put in a sigh or a yawn or a sneeze or a little giggle, like you have the freedom to do that. It doesn't need to be so clean all of the time. So they're kind of things that show how the two can be very different, and as a result, you do need to have experience in the video game sector to be present in there, depending on kind of where you're at with that sliding scale of the type of game. Okay, sorry, as you can tell, this is like all housekeeping things to keep in mind before we get into everything else about the upskilling. Staying healthy. This is a priority for voice actors and should be for clients as well. I know that I've gone into sessions where my health hasn't necessarily been the client's first consideration, which is completely fair enough. But as a result, it's kind of important to share that there needs to be a respect there from the client and the voice actor and communicate everything, because longevity in our careers is really important. So first off, being conscious of what your body and voice can tolerate. I know that I can't have coffee in the morning and then have a full day of voice acting. It dehydrates me. It makes my voice sound super clicky. It's not good for me. However, I know for other voice actors, they'll have a coffee every day and they're like, yeah, I'm good. Alcohol, very similar as well. If I have a drink the night before, I'm kind of like, oh, I have to have a session later the next day to be all right. Karaoke, can't do that anymore. Some people are super lucky and are singers as well and they can manage it. It's just not for me. Late nights and understanding of vocal range is probably the most important one. If you're struggling with an audition, it's probably not the right audition for you, because you need to imagine if you book it, you might risk losing your voice after that session, which is not great because this is our full-time gig. Warm-ups, same sort of thing. Some people are like, nah, I don't do warm-ups anymore. I personally do them because I sound super tired of a morning and I need to sound a little more energized. So yeah, it's important for me. For other people, it might not be. Breathing and yelling. Just looking at the sentence because I'm nervous. Try not to let nerves get to you because it could subconsciously be restricting your vocal cords due to the stress, and it causes that tension, and as a result your voice is high and all kept up here. Use your diaphragm. If there's grating on your throat, you need to stop. And I know that this part sounds a little bit unusual. This is a bit of a personal thing because I'm not coming from a vocal coach perspective. I'm coming from a voice actor, personal, professional perspective. For me, when I'm doing screaming roles and things like that, I will harbor tension with my limbs rather than letting my throat handle the brunt of it. So I will cause tension here and stretch out my arms and bend my legs and increase my center of gravity, basically so that power is coming from anywhere else but here. And that's a strategy that I really like to do. 4, advocating for yourself in a session, which is perhaps the most important. With dubbing, because you do dub for video games as well, it can be a little bit harder to ask this, but for everything else in video games, it genuinely should not be a problem. I've yet to have an issue with it at all. Ask, if they don't already offer, ask to start with the role closest to your natural tone, because the last thing that you want to do is start with a screaming role and then be expected after that to retain your natural voice again. Sometimes it's okay if it's a super short session, but sometimes you just never know how many takes a director is going to ask of you, so it's really important to do that. Leave screaming roles at the end of the session, or even greatly projected roles. Projection still hurts your voice sometimes. Ask at the start of the session what roles are going to be read for. I have had a circumstance before where I thought I was only recording for a couple of roles, saved the screaming one till the end, and then they asked me to do another role, and I kind of thought, are you sure you want me sounding like this? So yeah, obviously this is a note for voice actors on the health element, but also from a performance audio quality side, it's also really important for clients. So if you are hiring voice actors and they don't speak up for themselves, ask, because you're going to get better performances if they start with their natural voice first. Okay, dun dun dun, technology pillar. Cool. Equipment level up. Okay, so if you are a voice actor or you're looking at getting into voice acting from home, because as we know what today's times are like. I'm not going into studios. I'm doing everything from home. And even my agency had said, we need people with home studios or else can't really work at the moment. It doesn't need to be an amazing studio. So here's just some basic level uppy kind of things. A computer. Doesn't need to be an iMac. I just keep the iMac on there. I'm Mac skewed. Don't hurt me. A USB microphone. I've basically listed kind of my setup. But as I said, I started 10 years ago. There's probably better technology out there, but I'm just generalizing. A USB microphone, a pop filter, a shock mount, a stand, and a USB. Stand is obviously depending on, if you're at your computer or you're kind of external from your computer and are using a monitor. Those kind of things depend. And I've put down Twisted Wave as your recording program. I don't use Twisted Wave. I actually used to always recommend Audacity. I have Audacity. I've used it forever. But there's been some controversy surrounding the system and downloading it as of today, so I'm trying not to recommend it anymore. Basically my current copy is okay, but I won't be upgrading the program, and people generally aren't downloading it now. But Twisted Wave is free, it's really easy to use, and that's a great program to use too. And past that, your environment is always going to be really important, so don't just end it there at the equipment. Use blankets, use pillows, use mattresses, have a designated space that is still sound dampened. You're not necessarily going to have soundproofing. You can see I'm in my studio here at the moment. It's not soundproof, but it does block out a ton of noise. But it's mainly dampening so that my voiceover doesn't sound like it's hitting all these walls and you can hear me in a tin can or you can hear all that reverb. Environment is more important than the equipment. And with all this, this is a pretty easy startup, about $300, obviously not including the computer. I'm assuming you already have a computer. That's kind of an entry price. Alrighty. And boss level, dun dun dun. Look, I don't even have all this stuff. But I'm kind of just showing you the scale of which you can get equipment and the prices that go with it and stuff, just giving you a full overview if you do want to take baby steps to level up. Basically, when I started, I kind of just voiced for ages and reinvested some of this money while I had my actual full-time job. But in short, on the last screen, you could see that we had a USB microphone. Here, we're leveling up to an XLR microphone. I've got the example of the beautiful Neumann U87. The main note is you need an XLR cord for that, female to male. I did female to female or male to male, or I don't know, and it didn't work, obviously. So I make an effort to always include that little bracket note. Interface, the Apollo Twin. Honestly, I have the Apollo Solo. It's great. It's not a big deal. And software. If you're super good at audio engineering, which I'm not, as I said, I have Audacity. I tried Reaper and fumbled drastically, so I don't use that. But if you're more skilled than I, which is fairly likely, you might want to do Reaper. And then a whisper room, if you'd like to. You're looking at over $10,000 basically for all of this stuff. So yeah, being a voice actor can be super expensive. But yeah, as I said, it's the environment that really matters. But this is just kind of an idea of some industry loved stuff, and it's up to you how far you want to take it. The big question, and this is kind of what I normally talk about. How do I build my portfolio in games? In a dot point, get Twitter. Twitter is the land of game developers and casting opportunities. And then people always ask me, well, why not Instagram? And I'm like, I don't know why not Instagram. It's just not. Twitter is where it's at. But here are some Twitter handles you can follow if you'd kind of like to keep your finger on the pulse of casting opportunities that are going around. Or vice versa, if you are casting for your indie game, it's fairly likely we're all gonna see it if you post it on there. So at VA Casting RT, basically they just retweet every paid casting call that comes across their notifications on Twitter, which is super handy. So if you're a voice actor, follow them and maybe bell their notifications so you're notified every time there's a new opportunity. At Sarah Sakura VR, she's an indie casting director, which is great. At Kocha Sound, who's a production company, they do video games and anime, and occasionally they'll put out casting opportunities if there's a very particular spec that they're trying to meet. And then the other one, at NSIP Studio, which is also an indie casting director, which is great. I've worked with them a few times. Okay, so that's kind of the overview with Twitter. How do I build my portfolio in games? Continued. There are obviously lots more than this. This is a very, very brief overview. In short, if you don't have a portfolio at the moment and you're kind of just looking at hopping in, here are some free-to-play elements that you can go to. So we have the Voice Acting Club, which has paid and unpaid casting calls. Obviously, if you're a game developer too, looking to cast these games, I've got to keep referring to voice actors and game developers if you're looking at being hired or hiring. It's a wonderful place to go for the Voice Acting Club. They also have a Discord too, so just find them on their Twitter, and then they've got their Discord link in the description. Join up, and they tend to have paid and unpaid casting calls from across the internet, all free, and it's run by the wonderful Kira Buckland. On Facebook, you have the VAA, which is the Voice Acting Alliance, which occasionally has some unpaid and paid casting calls. Newgrounds, I was going to ask for a show of hands, but we can't quite do that today. If you're in the chat, feel free to put up your hands if you've heard of Newgrounds. If you have, obviously you'll know it's probably preferred that you're over the age of 18 on this website. Now that disclaimer's out of the way. You can go to the community box on the homepage and then forum jump to voice acting, and occasionally there might be a casting call on there. And they do animations, video games, lots of cool stuff. Casting Call Club, which has paid and unpaid casting calls as well. Not as reputable as the Voice Acting Club. It just doesn't seem to be as strongly moderated, so there's going to be a ton of stuff that never goes into fruition, unfortunately. So just try to apply a critical eye, not just with that website, but in general. YouTube, obviously, super simple. Put in terms like voice acting auditions, and then do it to do casting calls over the last week or 2 weeks or whatever. Or you can do casting call voice. Just play with a couple of search terms that you feel like developers or casting directors might be using to attract voice talent. So play with those and you'll probably see some different things come up. And Reddit. And there are a ton of different subreddits you can join in there. I think there's recording for free. Please being conscious. I'm not encouraging people to work for free. So when I've kept saying there are unpaid and paid casting calls, I'm generally referring to game jams or like fourth year student projects, those kind of things. Collaboration projects that are not making games with a price point or ads or anything like that, right? If developers and artists and things aren't making money, it's totally fine for voice actors to not make money. Some voice actors will be doing this as their job and they'll say, unfortunately, sorry, I don't take on that kind of work. And that's up to everyone individually. But yeah, I'm not saying do a Nintendo Switch game or an Xbox game or a mobile game for free. That's definitely not what I'm advocating. That's not what I'm about. But yeah, so being very conscious that there are no price point, no ads, no DLC, that kind of thing. Then it's totally fine to do for free. Rates, okie dokie. This is always going to be a hard question because, yes, we have rate guides. We have the Global Voice Acting Alliance, which is known as the GVAA. And very recently, as of the last year, we've had Gravy for the Brain, Australia. For most of my career, I've referred to the GVAA first for video games, just because for a very long, Australia still really doesn't have a proper rate guide. This is kind of the first introduction of even acknowledging games. So for a very long time, I've kind of stuck with the GVAA. So those rates are in USD and Gravy for the Brain are in Australian. Standardly, for non-union games, we're looking at $250 USD per hour with a 2-hour minimum, right? That's kind of where we attempt to start. There are some voice actors that make allowances for indie games, which is totally fine. So for voice actors, we're not looking at devaluing our services if you're a beginner voice actor. It's not about that. It's more looking at the client, and if this is their first commercial project, would we charge $250 USD per hour with a 2-hour minimum? Maybe not. It is up to you and your discretion if you would like to charge a little bit less. If that indie client has a $500,000 Kickstarter crowdfunded campaign, it might be a little bit different, and we might say, hey, we're going to charge you standard, which is fair. So this is where it's a bit tricky. I personally believe I will kind of do a case by case. I will research your studio. I will find out if you've had a Kickstarter. I will find out if you've had any other previously greatly successful titles. If I know before the audition and you're still early in the process that you've got a publisher deal and you're going to all the consoles, then yeah, I'll probably charge you standard, even if you've only done a couple of games in the past. So yeah, I feel like that part is incredibly important in determining the rate. Alternatively, if you are a huge AAA studio, we might charge more than that, which is why it's really great that both of these rate guides are tiered. Personally, with me and my agent, I average around 300 AUD per hour with a 2-hour minimum. And that's kind of hitting that slightly less than the standard GVAA market, because I obviously know that Australia is made up of a ton of indie game developers. So I don't want to be charging exactly standard. I want to go a little bit less. But the way that our framework here in the Australian game industry is going, and we are having more AAAs, like that might be increasing along with the industry's development as well. So that's kind of something to keep in mind if you are a voice actor or you are a game developer looking at implementing voice acting. In terms of, and this is the next standard question I generally get asked, in terms of how many words per hour we can fit into a live directed or self-directed session, if it's live directed, it can really, really depend. I've had some clients which are like, okay, I want you to do 1 take per line, and basically if I want something redone, I'll ask you to stop. And that's kind of it. Generally, if it is a MOBA or something like that where they're like 1 hits, they're happy for me to do 1 take. So as a result, the word output is going to be much bigger. If I'm doing something like an RPG or a fully voiced visual novel or something like that, which are huge dialogue boxes, we'll probably have a huge talk about story beforehand, and you might want me to take it 1 sentence at a time in the dialogue box, or there's going to be some parts that work and some parts that don't in that dialogue box, and we're going to do it again. In that case, there's going to be a lower word output. So it can really depend. In short, it could be anywhere between 750 words to like 1,250, sometimes a little bit more, but that's kind of the range that I give because it just depends. But yeah, that's a bit of an overview. I hope that helps. But do go to their websites if there are other things you're curious about, like if you want to have your trailer voiced, or I don't know, if you have a phone system in your office and you want that voiced. the rates do differ depending on the sector. So yeah, it's a big conversation. All right, cool. We're approaching the end. All right, resources. So if you're looking to keep upskilling, here are some resources I can recommend, because as I said, there's only so much I can fit in today. So my main thing is like, here's a bit of everything and here are some extra places you can go. In terms of classes, I've done a ton with Real Voice LA, which is a US company, and they collaborate with a ton of different casting directors and voice actors to teach classes. So I've done classes with Kirsten Day, Tasia Valenza, Kira Buckland, a ton through that company. So it's really great, even if video games aren't your jam, which I doubt it because we're here at GCAP. They do have classes for commercial and everything else too. Adventures in Voice Acting as well has a strong character focus, also some anime dubbing if that's what you're interested in. Extra Terrible, they do dubbing, creative marketing classes, tons of different things. And I'm only doing a very small, like little promo thing. I do run some classes through Voices of Tomorrow in Melbourne. I'm not doing them at the moment, obviously, with things kind of being closed. But I used to take trips to Melbourne to do them a couple of times a year. And I would run my video game workshops through them, or my using Twitter to acquire video game work. So those are kind of the two things I'd run with them. If you would like one-to-one coaching in commercial work though, they're great, and at least they're Australia-based, which is really appealing. But obviously we have classes which are more like you're with 5 other people or 10 other people or 20 other people. If you want a one-to-one coach to really work with you specifically and fine-tune some of those reads and really develop in the video game sphere, I'm always going to recommend international coaches. I can't recommend people here in Australia as much, only because I know that with most of the work I'm doing, it's still over in America. Hopefully that changes here in the Australian industry, but for now, the heavy hitters are over there. So as a result, I'm always going to recommend doing remote coaching with them. And of course, I'm just recommending some of the ones that I've gone through that I thought were great. Erin Fitzgerald is wonderful. She's great with beginners. Really teaches you acting foundations. So it's kind of less about voice. It's more like a one-to-one drama lesson, and really focusing on physicality and embracing the character on a really physical level. David Sobolov, I feel like I butchered his name, but he is wonderful. He's probably the best coach I've ever had. I've only had one session with him though, but it was like mind-blowing. He's incredibly specific on fine-tuning your performance. He creates new scenarios for you and doesn't even need to look at you. He can just hear if he believes or doesn't believe a performance, and he can target your strengths and weaknesses really fast, like mind-blowingly fast. So yeah, if you have had a ton of experience and you're like, I just want to get to that next level and book a little bit outside of your vocal type, I would really recommend working with him. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend him for beginners because he is so specific. I think it might be a bit of a waste. But yeah, if you've already had lots of training and you've had lots of experience, I think it's definitely worth taking at least one class with him. He's an excellent coach. And then another one is the wonderful Lisa Biggs, who I've done a ton of webinars with, a ton of talent evaluations with. She's great. She's a great promo voice in animation. She's excellent at character. And she'll be super honest with you in terms of how you're going and what you can do next, which is what this is all about if you're looking to keep upskilling. All right. Okay, last little promo thing. If you're looking to cast Aussie voice actors or are a voice actor looking to find their people, because I know for the first 5 years, I think I struggled with that. I didn't know anybody else who was doing this, and yeah, it was a little bit sad. So yeah, as a result, I now moderate this Discord called Avo, the Aussie voiceover. We have the Twitter page, but yeah, come and join the Discord, and that's where I was saying that we post casting calls and consults and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, it's a really nice community. So come and join if you're looking at casting or if you're looking at finding your people. Oh, we got there. Thank you so much for watching this today. I hope it was informative and a little bit fun, and it still kind of felt live-ish. Anyway, I'll be in the chat, and I'm looking forward to receiving your questions and answering them as quickly as my little fingers will allow. Thanks so much. Bye.